University of New York at Stony Brook, and now teaches at the New School in New York City. Author of 5 books of poetry, his work has been widely anthologized. In 1985, he won the Lamont Prize from the Academy of American Poets for his book, Victims of the Latest Dance Craze. And in 1992, The Gathering of My Name was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. His most recent book, Autobiography of a Jukebox, was published by Carnegie Mellon University Press. Professor Eady has received numerous awards, including a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Lila Wallace Reader's Digest Writers Award, a Rockefeller Foundation Fellowship, and the Prairie Schooner Strauss Award. Cornelius Eady's is a poetry book of the spoken voice and one highly influenced by and engaged in creating music. When life turns out to be, as he says, a symphony of near misses, what's left is improvisation, jazz, and the blues as a means of expression and of artful revision. As he says in the poem, I'm a fool to love you. This is the way the blues works, its sorry wonders, makes trouble look like a feather bed, makes the wrong man's kisses a healing. His book, Autobiography of a Jukebox, not only includes a number of blues poems and many based on jazz musicians, but also a CD of Eady's songs. His poems are a kind of fusion themselves, and the line between poetry and music cannot definitively be drawn here. But music is not an evasion of, but a way at essential truths. Eady's poems engage the most difficult topics of our day, both private and public, from family conflict to the racism and violence that continue in our culture, not only between communities, but among them as well. Always aware of the tension in the word, as well as the world, these poems demonstrate a wide emotional register, from the serious Rodney King blues to the lighter, the poetic interpretation of the twist, but always resonating with Eady's own distinctive timbre. In the poetic interpretation of the twist, the speaker grows impatient with talking of the past, saying, let's not talk anymore about old dances. I have an entire world on the tip of my tongue. Such talk holds back creation, the artistic improvisation around the keynote of the present moment, which opens new worlds for audience as well as artists. In piano concerts, he writes, what I want now is to rise with these notes and keep rising. Putting aside this talk of old dances, let us rise with the notes of the poems themselves. Cornelius Eady.
Good. Well, thank you all for coming. I feel a little awkward being in a pulpit. Probably a black man in a pulpit. Boy, that's dangerous in the South. That could be a real dangerous combination. First, I'll start telling you, God knows what I'll end up doing. No. I was thinking of that joke that they say about Baptist preachers, like they steal quotes. I can't even remember how it goes. It was the first time they acknowledge it, the second time they just say it, and the third time it's theirs. And all these poems are mine. It is spring. It is April. It is, we have set the clock ahead finally, which is my favorite time of the year. And I think to open the reading, I'm going to read from Victims of the Latest Dance Craze for a number of reasons. One is that one of the poems in the book is a cycle, it's a It's sort of like an aborted cycle of poems about the seasons. I only wrote three months out of the 12-month cycle, and then realized that I just couldn't possibly come up with 9 more. But this is called April. Suddenly, the legs want a different sort of dance. This is because the eyes look out the window and the sight is filled with hope. This is because the eyes look out the window and the street looks a fraction better than the day before. This is what the eyes tell the legs, whose joints become smeared with a fresh sap which would bud if attached to a different limb. The legs want a different sort of work. This is because the ears hear what they've been waiting for, which cannot be described in words, but makes the heart beat faster as if one had just found money in the street. The legs want to put on a show for the entire world. The legs want to reclaim their gracefulness. This is because the nose at last finds the right scent and tugs the protesting body onto the dance floor. This is because the hands, stretching out in boredom, accidentally brush against the skirts of the world. And I'm going to read a poem that I read in the dining room. This is called Waffle House Girl. I didn't realize that I was tapping into this really big mythology about waffle houses, about the Waffle House chain. But I wrote the book in Lynchburg, Virginia. I was living in Lynchburg, Virginia at the time, and I was going to the Warren Wilson MFA program in Smyrna, South Carolina. And the thing that I noticed when I was there was that a lot of the students that came down from the north, it's a low residency program, meaning that twice a year everyone comes down for about 10 days and hang out, and they do readings and conferences and stuff like that, and then they go back to do work through the mail. Anyway, but when the Easterners would come down, would come down, they were so fascinated by the Waffle House, and it was the place to hang out for us. So this is about 2 evenings at the Waffle House. And it's a poem about work as well. Waffle House Girl. Not much to this story, just a thin waitress, a southern girl at an all-night diner. In fact, she was slow with our orders, jumbled the items the way you blow a good punchline. The story was her nails, purple against the tan countertop, the shot of that color that late at night. 2 nights later, that detail scraped off by whatever made her take the night shift. Our orders served as if we weren't the only ones sitting in the booth. I let go of my story of her dancing at the imagined go-go bar, the evening becoming a little stiff around the edges as I saw once again what I did not care to see. Like I said, I was living in Lynchburg, Virginia. And we're having a lot of talk this afternoon about poetry. And I want to read the last poem in Victims of the Last Dance Craze. The reason I want to do this is because it's about writing. It's about fame or obscurity. I live in New York now, and I was living in New York at the time when I got the job at Sweetwater College. And when I moved down to Virginia, the Sweetwater campus, I was, of course, like any Northerner, afraid that I was cutting myself up from all sorts of culture. So the first thing I did when I got to Lynchburg, Virginia, was to go and get a library card. And the library in Amherst, Virginia, is in a shopping mall, convenient place. But it makes a lot of sense. And it's also about the poem's also about fame. And what I mean about it is that when we write poetry, we were talking about this afternoon with some, I was talking about this afternoon with some of the students. But one of the things that I think comes up is the idea of what is going to remain, what lasts, who's going to last. And we write our little books and we hope that somehow there's that wall of fame and somehow those books are going to make it over. Our little darlings are going to make it over somehow. And so I got my library card in the Amherst Project Library, and I, of course, go looking for the poetry section. And the only two books of poetry that were in the library that afternoon was a book of Shakespeare's sonnets and the collected works of Paul Laurence Dunbar. That was it. Nothing else. So, nobody else made it over the wall, at least as far as we're concerned in Amherst, Virginia. And it's one of those sobering moments that all writers should experience once. Dan's at the Amherst County Public Library. Fellow poets, my brothers and sisters, comrades, distinguished guests and visitors, yes, even the tourists in their t-shirts and mirrored sunglasses. Before our attention begins to wander, let me ask this. In 100 years, no, say 50 years, if through grand design or fluke, our world still stands and leads our descendants to this branch library in Amherst, Virginia, which poets would they find on the shelves? The answer probably is, they will only find what I found this afternoon, Shakespeare and Paul Laurence Dunbar. In spite of, and in view of, and in spite of this awful truth, I would still like to leave one or two thoughts behind. If you are an archaeologist and find these items in Mr. Dunbar's collected works, this poem, a pair of red laces, please understand that this was how I defined myself. A dancing fool who couldn't stay away from words, even though they brought me nothing but trouble. I was better when I danced, the language of the body so much cleaner. I was always in jealous awe of the dancers, who seemed, to me at least, to be honest animals. When I danced, I imagined myself a woman, because there is no sight more lovely than a woman kicking her heels up in a dive. This was how I wasted my time, trying to become the Henry Ford of poetry, and mass-produced a group of words into a thing that could shake and be owned by the entire world. Naturally, I failed. Of course, even the failure was a sort of dance. My friend, I bequeath to you what I know. Not the image of a high, glistening city, but the potential in tall grass flattened by a summer storm. Not the dance, but the good intentions of the dance. This was the world I belonged to, with a symphony of near misses, and in its name, and in the names of all those omitted, I dance my small graffiti dance. I've been working on a memoir. You hear the hesitation in my voice because of a number of two reasons. One, I'm still not 100% convinced that writing a memoir at the age of 45 is still too early to write a memoir. You know what I mean? I don't think 45 years is still enough to really think out a story more than 20 maybe. And the other thing is that it's a very interesting sort of location. I'm not trying to write about my life until I'm 45. I'm trying to write about my life between the ages of about 6 and 7 years old till around about 13 or 14 years old when I started to actually write poetry. So it's the pre-language years in my life. And I've been at this for a while. I'm going to read a few pieces from this. This is called Poetry. It's Valentine's Day, 4th grade, Nathaniel Rochester, school number 3, and school number 3. Today, we learn about poetry. Mrs. Edwards, our teacher, who is my age now, but very old then, has missed a unit in her teaching guide concerning rhyme and meter. But I already know what I need to know. Like a good kid, my body automatically squirms at the word. Why? Have I ever read a poem before this? No, neither has any other child in the class. But the word just has that sound about it, like vegetables. that makes us want to shove our hands in our pockets and pout is a grown-up word. A suck the fun from out of the room word, like behave. Every kid winces as if the lips of a dreaded aunt were upon them. Today, class, Mrs. Edwards says in that hopeful tone I've grown to use myself over the years, you will choose a Valentine and write them a poem. But no one loves anybody this morning. The word poetry has claimed our affection. Mrs. Edwards, however, has this going for her. She comes prepared. She is the third teacher we've had so far this year. Our first group, ill or pregnant. Our second, young, idealistic, maybe fresh from college, only lasted a few days. We could smell her fear. She wanted to be our friend, which is the weakest thing a new teacher can ever do. One afternoon, in the middle of a lesson she knows we're not listening to, her voice begins to crack. Then she begins to sob. Her weeping eyes look out on a class that holds absolutely no pity. 20 odd, smug faces asking, what are you doing here? She slams her book on her desk and runs. Pleasure buzzes among us. And the war between grown-ups and kids, this day is a lock of Custer's scalp. Mrs. Edwards understands that the only things a fourth grade class will understand is respect earned through a little unspecified fear. Some people have a voice that tells a kid, don't try it. Mrs. Edwards lets us hear this voice on her first date with us. This is why, for this new exercise, we will moan quietly in our heads and take out a sheet of paper. Poetry. Mrs. Edwards, not wanting to waste all morning on this, has taken pity on us by writing out a group of words on the blackboard that end in the letter S. Use the words on the board, she says, to write your poem. Give your poem to your Valentine, or if you're shy, to Mrs. Edwards, who will pin them unsigned on the bulletin board. Poetry. Our dumb pencils escape the paper. We shift in our seats. We sniffle, bored. Why do they ask this stuff of us? What do they want to know? How nosy can we get? Out of the forced mere silence, the low rumble of business in the other classrooms, the sound of fingers brushing away erased words, the awful tick of the wall clock, come 4 lines into my head. SOS, I'm in a mess, and I need you, I must confess. Is this it? Is this what she wants? I'd rather be in gym class, bunched up in a corner with the rest of the skinny boys, fighting for our lives against the jocks in a game of dodgeball. Good, says Mrs. Edwards when she reads it. Where does it go? Into some young girl's hand who couldn't care less, and I don't remember. And somehow, somewhere, deep in my wannabe, a soldier, fireman, doctor, the woman. Daddy and I are in our Buick, stopped at a red light, when a young, shapely woman crosses our path. I'm 11 or 12 years old, maybe older, and I'm beginning to form secret opinions. These are the days when we don't really get along, but I keep my mouth shut as he tries to tell me things. I don't like him, but I want something. If I'm in the car, it must be to protect my sisters and my shopping interests. Except for a few personal items, which he leaves to my mother, our father is the one who does all the grocery shopping at our house. He is the only dad we've ever heard of that does this. It is his way of controlling the purse strings. Plus, I think it's an excuse for him to get out of the house on weekends. Too bad for us. He tends to think of groceries as fuel. These are the days we are living partly off government surplus, powdered milk and powdered shame, grown where kids, our tongues and stomachs must know what any foot soldier knows. We crave sweets, seasoning, and the occasional brand name, but we are living with a man who sleeps on the couch and thinks Ritz crackers are cookies. We have learned it's far better just to be in the store and grab. We are in the car together. I am surrounded by the smell of grease on rags and the metal tube box he keeps in the back seat, and though I love the Buick, I don't like him. I am the drunk at the rescue mission. He is the servant you have to endure before you get to chow down. I am suffering in silence as he rattles on. These are my impatient days with him. The stuff I'm interested in, atomic submarines, flying squirrels, the way a finger skims the surface of a horse chestnut, he cares nothing about. The woman crosses our path. Says my daddy. His eyes are radar on her hips. Look at that heaven. Then the light changes, and off we sail with my father's unheard blessing sniffing at the heels of the woman's big legs. There is a sensation of stillness in the cab as the rest of the world glides by. I smell the pennies stuck to the bottom of the open glove compartment. For the moment, he thinks we're pals. We're not pals. I'm restless. He thinks we're friends. We're not friends. Rituals. Linda, my sister Gloria, and I are standing on our back porch with the remains of our black cat, Honey, who was just up and died. His whole body is small enough to fit in a shoebox. How solemn the three of us are. I am 6 or 7 years old, my sister 10 or 11. Who told us this is the way to take care of our daddy? Honey is going off to join our dead mutt Blackie in the garden. So that we'll never forget him, my sister has cut off the side of the cardboard box and she draws Honey's portrait in crayon. A circle, 2 eyes, a pair of triangles, a half moon, and whiskers. Then she scrawls the cat's name at the bottom, and we drag a chair over and nail it on the bedroom wall next to the portrait of Blackie. Blackie, who ate something tougher than a dog's stomach and had long, wavy ears. Now we stand and weep on the back porch. It is time for words to be spoken. Honey is in the open shoebox, stiff, lower jaw frozen wide, which we place before us on a ledge. The leaves of our apricot tree fit in shadows, spreads along the ground and crosses our face and naked arms. Lord, we say, be kind to this cat. Lord, we say, make sure he doesn't suffer. Please, Lord, forgive him. Then there's nothing left but our small sadness and duty. Maybe one of us covers his body with dandelions. We replace the top and begin to walk single file down the steps into my mother's garden. One of us carries the box, another a rusted hoe or spade. It is a sad but not a long job. The brisk march through the young okra, cucumbers, and collard greens, the spot we choose in the far corner next to the fence where nothing else will ever be planted again, the scrape and crunch of dirt as it is turned over to the light. He was a great cat, friendly and fun, and we want to remember him forever. But we fail to mark the grave, and we do not figure on the wind, the snow, and the rain, which quickly smooths the mound back to crabgrass. One day, we look out the kitchen window, and our eyes have lost all trace. Then his love begins to slip our way. One more from the section. The arrows. My sister, her best friend Linda, and I are out in the neighborhood at night stalking cars. We wield homemade bows, tall green stems we call ragweed, cut and curved with string found lying around our homes. For arrows, we have weighed and selected the right dried branches and notched one end from the twine. For arrowheads, we use pop-out caps wielded on by rocks or the weight of our sneakers. We are at war, and in the easy, confused jumble kids make of history, we set out to destroy Nazi tanks with bows and arrows. Tonight, we fight both the Germans and the colonies. We are doing the stuff that kids love to do without thinking, without asking. If caught, we'll call it play. Whose idea was this? Probably my sister's. At least she's the age when my parents begin to falter curiosity and willpower. What are we doing out at night? Since everyone in the neighborhood knows everyone else, and we rarely travel any further than 4 or 5 blocks, the shops on West Main Street, the edge of a bit too far at one end, the railroad bridge and Carissa Street at the other, our parents let us roam the summer streets until we run out of gas. I am 7 or 8 years old. Linda and my sister just entering their teens. In a few years, I will be a guy and too old to be a mascot, but for now, we are a team. We are at war. We are Indians. We are tank killers. We are trapped behind enemy lines. We are also scientists. We are curious to know the physics involved when an arrow hits a speeding car. We scrunch our small bodies into the damp along the vessels on the bridge and wait. We hear the first car before we see it. We hide, and then we spring. I will not grow up to be a hunter, but I do know how the blood pounds in the ear the second before you draw in your breath and take a beat. We are too scared to miss. The light-colored sedan rocks and wheels. For a long moment after the sound of the skid fades, there is nothing but the car, the bridge, the summer stars blinking. Then the door opens, and part of a human arm begins to swim out. And I'm going to read some poems from You Don't Miss Your Water. This is a cycle of poems about the death of my father. He died, maybe 7 years ago, from complications of sugar diabetes. And this is about my relationship with him. This is also about the last 8 months in the hospital for him. I think I spoke to some of the students this afternoon and told them I come from a town in upstate New York called Rochester, and it's a working class town. And my father and I had a different relationship about work, a different definition about work, what it meant and what it was. And that was partly his fault. And the reason for that is also partly a blessing because it's his fault. The reason that it's his fault was because he was able to, by having a stable house and having a roof over our heads and having 3 meals and allowing me to have that kind of comfort, he allowed me to have an option in my life. He allowed me to be able to choose a life of the imagination as opposed to his own life. But because of that, his definition of, as I said, his definition of work and my definition of work are 2 separate things. Like, for example, and for those of you who are aspiring writers, you'll have to deal with this yourself on some level. You'd run in and I'd say, Daddy, I've got my book published. And he'd say, fine, that's good, when you're going to get a job. Or, I just won the Lamont Prize for my second book, but that's fine, when you're going to get a job. I mean, the definition of work is and what it isn't. And so we're constantly at one another's, at one another because of that. But I'm going to start with a poem that is not in Mr. Water. It's actually from the autobiography of the Jukebox. And it's a poem that came about from me simply asking my mother one day, how did you and Daddy meet? This is the story she told me. I'm a fool to love you. Some folks would tell you the blues is a woman, some type of supernatural creature. My mother would tell you, if she could, about her life with my father, a strange and sometimes cruel gentleman. She would tell you about the choices a young black woman faces. Is falling in love with some man a deal with the devil? In blue terms, the tongue we use when we don't want nuance to get in the way, when we need to talk straight. My mother chooses my father after choosing a man who was, as we sing it, of no account. This man made my father look good. That's how bad it was. He made my father seem like an island in the middle of a stormy sea. He made my father look like a rock. And is the blues the moment you realize you exist in a stacked deck? You look in a mirror at your young face, the face my sister carries, and you know it's the only leverage you've got. Does this create a hurt that whispers, how you going to do? Is the blues the moment you shrug your shoulders and agree? A girl without money is nothing, thus to be pushed about by any old breeze. Compared to this, my father seemed briefly to be a fire escape. This is the way the blues works it sorry wonders. Makes trouble look like a feather bed. Makes the wrong man's kisses a healing. And these are the poems we don't miss your way. You'll notice that all the poems, titles of the poems, phone calls. I know I'm losing you. Have you ever touched your father's back? No, my fingers tell me, as they try to pull up a similar memory. There are none. This is a place we have never traveled to, as I try to lift his weary body onto the bedpan. I recall a photo of him standing in front of our house. He is large, healthy, a stocky body in a dark blue suit. And now his bowels panic, feed his mind phony information. And as I try to position him, my hands shift and the news shocks me more than the sight of his balls. Oh, bag of bones, this is all I'll know of his body, the sharp ridge of spine, the bed sores, the ribs rising up in place like new islands. I feel him strain as he pushes for nothing. Feel his fingers grip my shoulders. He is slipping to dust. My hands inform me. You'd better remember this. One kind favor. My father is close to death, and in his final hours he begins his journey by asking anyone within range of his within earshot of his bed for a few things. He has to be allowed to go back home to Florida. He has to be able to cast off his dreary hospital gown. To be reunited to the shape of his own clothes. He wants someone to fetch in his shoes, now useless for weeks. The impossible act of slipping them on is a miracle of bending and tying. In his wishes, my mother arrives and sits at his bedside, or he changes it and he walks back into his house, into the living room, his own chair. He is so close to dreaming now, and his body lives with a desire to fix things. Soothe me. What happened to my money? My father asked me this towards the end of one of my visits to the hospital, and I think he must mean the large wad of cash he loves to flash, carry. The only leverage he thinks an old man has over the world, the thing I love the least about him. Skinflint, miser, money grubber, tight-fisted ruler of the house. But no, it's small. He's talking petty cash. Look over there in that drawer, he says. Don't you see it? I see just what I expect. Tongue depressors, baby oil, diabetic candy he sniffed and left by the side of the road. If there was any cash there, it is long gone. A secret boon for some nurse or orderly, a justifiable tax for a hard-ass patient. So why don't I tell him the truth? Instead, I reach in my wallet, ask him, you mean this? And he watches me as I do and believes it. He robs me of $20, and I let him. I remember the strength left in his fingers, the way they clamped around the bill. If it was a kiss, we tease, who's your girlfriend? If it was a moment in a song, the lyric would sing, without you, I'm nothing. A rag, a bone, and a handkerchief. I'm sitting alone with my father at the funeral parlor. Viewing hours have just begun, but it's midday work week, and for a few hours it'll just be me and him. The first time I've laid eyes on him since the phone call woke me up. I'm doing what a son is supposed to do, or so I've been told, but it's hard work sitting with what used to love and trouble you. Of course, his body is a bright lie in his casket, everything that has brought him here, carefully hidden or rearranged. Is there something I want to tell him? Anything I can forgive. I can only sit and wait and listen to the gospel music as it buzzes through the speakers. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. All his time all his struggles that I still call life, all his trials. Motherless children. How many ways do I want to kill this woman, this young bureaucrat at the Office of Social Services, for wanting to kill me slowly, by degrees, kill me with provisions, kill me in measured words, kill my mother by rubbing her sad life with my father in her face. Oh, how this woman, bored, dulled by repetition, wants my mother officially rendered inert, reduced to a mere boarder in a broken down ghetto house. How she wants the word bastard to define our conversation. What did I say to you? Who knows? But I do know this look she's giving me after telling me that there's no place for my mother's well-being in their guidelines, that as far as they're concerned, she isn't even legally a part of my family. I know this look. This woman wants to observe a screamer or ripper. She wants her dreams of a babbling monkey to rise. Blow up, she whispers, as she explains what she isn't going to do for me. How my father's bound to disappear item by item. First his house, then his cars, then all his money, except for what it takes for a pine box at home. She thinks she's the facts of life. A wall with no apparent handholds. The river referred to in the old spirituals. Deep, wide, fraught with many sorrows. And her eyes dare me to become a nigger and kick over the table. Papa was a Rolling Stone. A few weeks before my father dies, my sister tells me a fuzzy story about a young woman she'd heard rumors about, a class of two ahead of her in high school who carried our unusual last name. And when my niece goes through some of my father's papers, she uncovers a small laminated card, a birth certificate from a Midwestern state for a boy born a year before I was, who was a different last name. What about this we want to know? And we badger my father in the hospital until he finally admits to us that the woman my sister tried but never got to meet in high school was indeed our half-sister. My father tells us that when my niece was an infant and my sister was living away in Florida, he'd bundle my niece up and take her to this woman's apartment. He was that proud of being a grandfather and knew my niece would be too young to remember. She married a rich man and they moved away to Israel. Is as far as he's willing to take us on this. She's happy, and I don't want to bother her. And the birth certificate. I see language in the way the bones in his thin body twist. His mouth says, beats me. He's pissed off that it's come down to this, that his children would have enough time to try and unravel a man's business. And then he clocked, which I took to mean, what makes you think I owe you this? 3 more. The Chapel of Love. And now, alas, it is too late. My wife and I are trying to tell my mother how wise it would be for her to finally marry my father now that he is lying half ashamed in the hospital. His doctors feel he'll be dying slow and he's burning up his pensions. Soon he'll have to go on Medicaid and the rules are firm. Single men that have made provisions must sign practically everything over to the government, must in their ironic terms spend down to an income they haven't seen since they were starting out, must whittle their desires to small items. Chewing gum, haircuts, playing cards, must transform themselves, whether they want it or not, from homeowners to paupers. Though they've lived together for over 40 years, as far as the government's concerned, without a paper, my mother is simply the woman he's been keeping. They're not married, and soon she'll lose the house. My father tells us he's willing, but when we bring this up with my mother, She answers with the voice I know she had on the day that she finally saw how things were with my father, that they would never wed, the young woman who decided with her last drop of self-worth that a part of his one good thing had come and gone. What a cold day that must have been in her heart. She will never visit him in the hospital. And now, in a voice that could damn a saint, she is telling us she'd rather starve on her anger than feed off his slow bread. I just want to testify. There was, at the end, a look of great peace on my father's face at the moment of his death. At the memorial service, my cousin tells the story to us as a way to infer a last-minute salvation, a meeting of Jesus in the middle of the air, this being, after all, the AME Zionist Church across from the vacant lot that used to be the elementary school me and my sister attended. This is the part of the service where we stand up for him, this small knot of family and friends in a very large group. He's gone and left my mother with nothing. Her name isn't on the deed of the house. Her name never appeals on his policies. Her mind's confused. She can't take care of herself by herself. And I'm having a real hard time convincing various agencies that she even exists. Which is why there is no casket to bear. Too expensive, we decide. Money to be better spent on living on my mother. Still, we give him a family send-off. A hard man, but his own man, sings the testimonies. A stingy man, but a family man. And I truthfully thank him for the roof he put over our heads, for staying when a lot of other men took a look at their wives, their babies, their house bills, and changed their names to fare thee well. And then my sister stands up through the pain and accidents of firstborn, first torn, stands up, the family's bad girl, the willful daughter, low-down spirit of red dresses and iodine. My sister stands up in a way I can't fully explain, but know belongs to black women. She stands up and declares, I'm just like him, but I'm a woman, so I can't get away. This is the last one. You don't miss your part. At home, my mother wakes up and spends some of her day talking back to my father's empty chair. In Florida, my sister experiences the occasional dream in which my father returns. They chat. He's been dead and gone for a little over a year. How it would please me to hear his unrecorded voice, now alive, only in the minds of those who remember. If I could, as if in the old spiritual, I could actually get a direct phone link to the other side. I could call him up, tell him about this small prize of a week I had teaching poetry at a ski resort a few miles from Lake Tahoe. Imagination, jackpot, brief, paradise of letters. How could I make him believe that I have got all of this modern apartment, this pond in front of my window, all from the writing of a few good lines of verse? My father, who distrusted anything he couldn't get his hands on. Most likely, he would listen, then ask me, as he always did, just for safety's sake, if my wife still had her good paying job. And I can't tell you why, but this afternoon, I wouldn't become hot and stuffy from his concern. Think old fool and right back. Of course, I'm still teaching college. It's summer. You know, this afternoon, I miss his difficult calls. And when he does, as he always would, how'd I treat you? I'd love to answer back. Fine, Daddy. They're paying me to write about your life. Thank you.